Thank you both for being with us. This is a co-production between the Hindustan Times and URL Media. We're in Chicago for the DNC 2024. I'm going to twist a question that I think we often get asked as South Asians and ask you to put your take on it, which is, where are you from? So if we could begin with Arvind, telling me your name, your district, and answering that question as you see fit of where you're from.
Sure. So my name is Arvin Vittal. I'm the state representative for the 30th Legislative District, which is in the North Hills suburbs of Pittsburgh. So I'm from McCandless in the north suburbs of Pittsburgh, and that's where I've lived for 17 years. But I was born in Madurai in Tamil Nadu, immigrated to the United States when I was 3 months old with my parents, grew up in the Detroit area, so certainly consider both South India and Michigan my home as well.
Wow. Shekar?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Mitchell, for having us. Really excited to be here. I'm Shekar Krishnan. My district is Jackson Heights in Elmhurst, Queens in New York City. We are proud about being a historic South Asian community, really the first when the Indian community immigrated to the United States. Jackson Heights was the birthplace of the diaspora in this country. But we're very proud about our food too, which I'm biased. I think it's the best food in the whole world.
Yeah.
That's my district. My family's I was born here, but my family's from South India originally, from Kerala. So we speak Palkar Tamil. And then my dad grew up in Mumbai, and my mom, my grandfather, her father worked for the Indian government in the aviation industry. So they were all ultimately settled in Delhi. So that's where my family's from. I'm very proud to represent such an incredibly diverse immigrant community in Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, Queens.
That's amazing.
And proud that the first Indian American ever elected to our New York City Council. It's history.
Wow. Yes, my father immigrated to Jackson Heights in 1971, so we are a part of that diaspora that you're mentioning. For both of you, is this your first convention? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, this is my first convention as well.
So Arvin, can we just stay with you, and if you could just kind of at a high level, and then we can maybe get into some specifics. What has it been like for you?
So it's really been eye-opening. Being from Pennsylvania, we're obviously ground zero for this presidential election. Seeing so many elected officials, so many journalists, so many of just everyday Americans who were here at the convention asking, what's going on in Pennsylvania? How is it going to go in this election? I think it really has put a spotlight that I think I realized, but I maybe now see it more, how critical both this election is going to be, as well as how critical Pennsylvania is. And we're seeing that highlighted at this convention.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with you for a moment because both of you, we asked you to do this because you were voting delegates. You're on the convention floor. You actually have a job that you're doing here. Can you explain a little bit, Arvin, about what that means?
Sure.
And then what you've had to do over the last few days?
So the way it works in Pennsylvania is that I was elected by my community, Democrats in my community, to be a pledged delegate to this convention. When I was asked to be part of the convention and on a delegate slate, it was when President Biden was running for office at the time. That obviously is no longer the case, but my job as a delegate is to represent my community towards the candidate that I'm pledged to. And when President Biden dropped out, it was to assess the candidates. And, I was very happy to support Vice President Harris as our nominee. So it's really voting for who the Democratic nominee is going to be for president and vice president.
Shekar, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Arvin, explained it really well. Just taking a step back, I would say, first of all, this convention has been electric. The energy, the excitement. I think two themes that we've heard, which I know for the New York delegation really stuck with us too, was one, the theme yesterday that kept coming up is joy, how we're really feeling the energy, the importance, the joy of the moment, looking forward and not looking backwards. And the second is the convention is happening 76 days before the election. So we feel joy now, but we have to really commit to doing the hard work of campaigning in this short sprint really that we have left to make sure that Kamala Harris and Tim also elected president and vice president. My path is a little bit different to me, delegate, than Arvin's, and it's a good way to really capture how you become a delegate. Arvin was elected. I wasn't elected. I was selected chosen by Governor Hochul and the Queens Democratic Party to make sure that the New York delegation really, and the Queens delegation in particular, represented the extraordinary diversity we have. So to be one of the South Asian delegates, one of the few ones representing all of New York State, and of course the only one from Queens, I think is also really touching to me in this historic moment when we're about to elect a Black American and South Asian American president. And it is a way to make sure that our delegates and our delegation overall really reflects the diversity of the Democratic Party in New York City and in New York State overall.
Yeah. We can move over to Arvin. I was going to ask about, I think what brings the Indianness to center in this convention, of course, is, as you mentioned, the identity of Kamala Harris, which has actually become an election issue, right? Donald Trump has mentioned a few times, I thought she was Indian. I didn't know she was Black. There's some in the Indian community who feel like she doesn't assert the Indian side enough. I mean, this is really something that has become a bit of a lightning rod is her identity. I just wondered, as Indian Americans, how you take that conversation, right? How does that resonate with you?
So I'll say it resonates with me in a few different ways. The first is on a personal level. As someone who was born in Tamil Nadu, like Kamala Harris's mother, it was a point of great pride to see someone like Vice President Harris ascend now to be our presidential nominee. And I think about it in the context of my family. I'm with my wife, who's also South Indian, and we're raising two girls who are going to be voting in this election for the first time, two young women, that they get to see a South Indian woman on the ballot speaking tonight in front of the convention to be our presidential nominee really speaks to the possibilities in this country. And I'm the first, like Shekar, I'm the first Indian American elected to our state house in Pennsylvania. And when I ran 2 years ago, because my area had not been represented either by a minority or for that matter by a Democrat ever, there were concerns both from my family and an immigrant South Indian family, as well as within the community, as to how I was going to be received by my neighbors. And what I saw was that when we meet people where they are and we have those one-on-one conversations, those barriers get broken down. And it actually became a political issue in my first race 2 years ago, where my opponent used terms similar to President Trump in questioning whether I was part of this community, even though I had lived there for 17 years. I'm a practicing emergency physician there. My opponent used rhetoric like, she's one of us, implying that I was not one of us, even though I was obviously part of this community and my wife had grown up there her entire life. So I think we have a changing America where we are seeing the growth of minority populations, including the Indian American population. And change is hard, but that's the story of America, where we assimilate immigrant communities, and our motto is E pluribus unum, for many one. So I think of it on a personal level, on a family level, and then on a political level about where we are and where we're going.
Shekar, any thoughts? How does this land with you?
I think I see it at two levels, at the New York level and then nationally. At the New York level, I'm the first Indian American elected to New York City government, and it's really shocking to note that, because we as Asian Americans are 18% of the population of New York City and growing, yet we do not have 18% representation in city or state government for that matter. We have the largest class of Asian American electeds now in New York City Council with 7 Asian Americans, but that's far fewer than our representation should be. And that really says something about the gap between the growing size, power, and contributions of our community and the lack of representation. Arvin and I are both the first, but I'm sure you'd agree with me too, that we definitely do not want to be the last, and we have to make sure that continues to grow. So that representation, to have in Kamala Harris someone at the national level who is Indian American, Black, and who represents both communities and brings that history to the White House, I think is very exciting and long overdue in many ways. Nationally speaking, I think this othering that Donald Trump is engaging in, this dangerous racism and xenophobia, it really shows you the difference between both parties. Democrats are a party that recognizes and champions the contributions of our immigrant communities to this country. That's personal to me. not only being a child of immigrants, but also in Jackson Heights, a historic community of immigrants from all over the world, we were the epicenter of the pandemic. And who was it that was making sure that everyone in New York City got the support they needed? Was our immigrant essential workers. And so you have one party that understands that and champions and recognizes the contributions of immigrants to our society and wants to make sure they're protected and their rights are protected and they have resources and services in their languages. And you have another party with this cult of personality that engages in really dangerous stereotypes, attacks about immigrants, keeping immigrants out, othering us. And that's really how stark the choice is in this election.
Yeah.
And he's done this before. He did this against Obama too. He's doing the same playbook of xenophobia.
It's interesting because there was a chant that come up a few times on the convention floor of "we're not going back," which I think a lot of people hear as a historic. That we're not going back in time. I think for immigrants, it also resonates with the "go back where you came from" framework that's used. And so I've talked to some folks throughout the convention on this idea of like our demographic reality and almost destiny as a country, right? So I think that's an important point.
Very true.
Yeah. This question keeps coming up with a lot of mainstream media, and it's interesting because we're all Indian Americans. So I'm surprised by it. I just wanted your reaction. What is behind the rise of Indian Americans in politics? Is there any factors you can point to? There's a record number of South Asian delegates, as we mentioned, at this convention. But are there any factors that you can use on, and we can stay with you, Shekar, on why you think this is perhaps a moment for Indian Americans in politics?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think about that often too. I would say, it's really the story of immigrants over generations in this country. And you look at Jackson Heights, for example, where we are not only a historic South Asian community, Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, but also a historic Latino community, Colombians, Mexicans, Ecuadorians. And we've had representations of the Latino communities because similarly, as they've come here too, and established and put down roots and been such a key part of the fabric of the city, as you grow in power, our needs, our concerns grow too. The importance of having the services from government in our languages for us becomes even more important for us, our children, our parents and grandparents. And so that, I think, translates ultimately into both stronger political power and the need for political representation that tracks that. I think it's the same thing with our Indian community too. As we grow, as our contributions become more and more evident to everyone across the country, the importance of having representation to reflect our growing political power becomes really important. And I think that's what we're seeing now too.
Repeat.
Yeah, I would agree with Shekar. And I think there's a couple other points to it, is that the initial Indian immigrant community to this country, starting in the late 60s, was highly educated, was able to integrate across the country in middle class and higher education professions. And so I think that confers an advantage in terms of those of us who are the children of immigrants to really be able to assimilate within the country more quickly than perhaps other generations of immigrants have. I also think there is a tradition in India of raucous democracy, and I think our parents brought that to this country. And so we as Indian American elected officials, I think, have role models culturally to become involved in the political process moving forward. And then lastly, and this is a colonial legacy, is English is a lingua franca within India, and we're coming to the United States with that linguistic background. Obviously, in Jackson Heights, multilingualism is much more important. Where I am in Western Pennsylvania, it's largely an English-speaking population completely, and so that allows someone like me, who is in a minority within my community, to be able to build bridges with other people. So I think it's the factors that brought Indian Americans to this country, and we've been able to take advantage of that to get involved in the political process.
Can I add one more?
Yeah.
I would just say too, I think I speak for both of them, I want to say we know that we are here in this position today because of the sacrifices of the generations before us, our parents, our grandparents. I was just at an Independence Day celebration at India Home, which is a beloved senior center and organization in Queens. And looking at all the seniors in the room, I said, I'm standing in this position because of each and every one of you. I never forget that. And that is true for us as Indian Americans and the larger Asian American communities. Our parents who came here did so, leaving their home 10,000 miles away, sacrificing, enduring, experiencing so much in terms of discrimination, racism, but they did it, and they, made it easier for us to both become doctors or lawyers, and then look to, as the next generation, how we, standing on the shoulders of our parents' generation, now translate this into political power. So I think that's a really important point to recognize too. I think it's true for all of us as Asian Americans.
We've all mentioned Gaza. I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how this has played out at the convention. Shekar, I know you've written an op-ed on the ceasefire, so maybe we start there on, you've come out, I think, pretty early over the last 300 plus days of this conflict, but any thoughts on how that's landing here?
Yeah, I think I was very heartened to see the way in which the calls to ensure we have an immediate and permanent ceasefire in this conflict, and to recognize that we need to also ensure not only that the war ended in a ceasefire, but that hostages are returned, and recognize also the incredible amount of suffering that both Gazans and Israeli families, whose hostages are still in captivity, are feeling right now. I think that the fact that was spotlighted at the convention by numerous speakers, from President Biden himself to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think really was important and very encouraging to see, because this conflict, the humanitarian toll has just been, and the pain has been really horrific. And so to see the party now putting that front and center on the stage at the convention, I think was very encouraging, and hopefully signals more to come in concrete terms of a lasting ceasefire and return of hostages in the near future. I think that really is a testament to where Democratic Party has come on this issue, and the recognition that we have to ensure it happens. And so that was very encouraging to see.
Arvin?
So in my community, which is, a purplish political area, I mean, it's very centrist and can be Republican or Democrat election to election. This issue has not been front and center. I do get some messages from constituents, but I haven't seen protests. I haven't seen a lot of questions when I knock on doors to ask me about this as a state legislator. What I do hear, though, is a certain alienation, especially in the Muslim population in my area, that they want to see more engagement from especially the Democratic Party, where they've largely been Democrats, but aren't sure if the Democrats are representing the suffering, as Shekar has brought up, in Gaza, and what we're seeing, along with the suffering that the Israelis are feeling, especially with the hostages. And so what I have tried to do is, in addition to communicating my role as a state legislator, is also to stay engaged with that community. I went to an iftar dinner at their request, and I have spoken to a number of different groups, both of Muslim and Jewish background, on what I do in state government. I think it's hard. I wish there was a simple answer of, we're going to have an immediate ceasefire. My concern is what happens the day after. Is there a hostage release, along with the release of Palestinian prisoners who have not had due process in their incarceration? What is the political solution here? Are we going to move more quickly towards a two-state solution, which I think is ultimately the direction that we need to go as a citizen? I think that is where the challenge is. I have my own perspective on the length of this war as being largely extended by political considerations on both sides. I think both sides are now extending the war for their own political aims, as opposed to what their stated aims are, either from the Israelis saying they're going to end Hamas or Hamas saying that, they want to see, a particular outcome. I think that honestly, that there's now an unfortunate logic that is pushing this forward for political reasons on both sides internally that is going to be very hard to break.
I just want to stay with you, Arvind, on other issues that you're hoping to somehow move Kamala Harris on, as we hear from her. I think Gaza's come up a lot, but are there other issues that, representing what the needs of your constituents are that you're hoping she meets policy where you're at?
Yeah, so I'm an emergency physician. I still practice. I'm the only physician in our legislature, first one in 60 years in Pennsylvania. And so healthcare has been a major focus of mine. My major legislative focus is medical debt relief. It's the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. I've personally seen patients who die from delaying seeking care until it was too late. We pushed legislation in Pennsylvania that had the governor's support and did not make it across the finish line this session. But Vice President Harris has said explicitly that this is a priority of hers. Yesterday, her vice presidential nominee said the same thing. And so I think that this is an issue that we can make real policy gains on. And I think healthcare in general is on the ballot in this election. The Affordable Care Act made a huge difference for my patients in the emergency department. I went from having 20% of my patients having no insurance to well under 10%. That's a life-saving difference for people in my community. And when we talk about reproductive rights, when we talk about addressing gun violence, those are public health issues that matter a great deal to the people that I represent. So I'm proud, not just as an Indian American and as a Democratic elected official, but as a healthcare professional, to say that Harris and Walz is the ticket that we should be supporting in this election because it's for the betterment of the health and well-being of my community.
Shekar?
So I think there are a few issues that come to mind. I think one in particular is reproductive freedom, reproductive health. It is women's rights are simply under attack right now because of both the Republican Party, Donald Trump, and the Supreme Court that has thoroughly lost its way. And you could hear the pain at the convention when we heard families talking about their difficulties with fertility, how important access to reproductive care is. I live in New York, but I'm very conscious of the fact that there are other states across the country where women simply cannot get access to health care because of all of these extremely draconian laws that have been passed in Texas and other states too, that are really harming women. And so I know that that's going to be a priority for Kamala Harris. I think that's very important for our entire country. And the second point is, as a civil rights lawyer, I feel this is important to me, but it's tied to the first one, which is the Supreme Court has just lost its way entirely, reversing Roe v. Wade in this country, going after so many different issues and causes that are important to all of us, and the level of conflicts of interest in the court right now. I'm very hopeful. I think it's very crucial that the new House administration really make an effort to ensure that the Supreme Court and the federal courts overall are much more reflective of really this country, so we don't have these kinds of horrific decisions coming up. And we can't underestimate how important that is. We can do all the other things on the policy front, but ultimately it will stop in the courts, and we have to fix the courts going up the SCOTUS. And finally, this is something I think is exciting as a father of two small children, is Governor Walz has really highlighted that in Minnesota. We have to make sure we're focusing on childcare, school lunches. Walz had a universal free lunch program for children in Minnesota. I think making sure that as we look to the future and not going back, that we are supporting families and children and making sure that we're counting the next generation is something I know that both Harris and Walz care deeply about, and I'm excited to see what policies will come out of there too.
Thanks.
Yeah, and if I could just add something, obviously the presidential race is getting all the love and all the attention, and rightly so, that it's obviously most prominent. But whether it's at the city level or the state level or at the federal level, if Kamala Harris is elected, but she's a Republican Congress, she's not going to be able to move these issues the way she should. In Pennsylvania, where I am, We have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate and a Democratic governor. That has stopped certain things from happening. Many of the policies that Governor Walz has enacted in Minnesota happened because we flipped the state legislature in Minnesota to be under Democratic control. So what I tell my constituents is that every election on the ballot, from the most local race to the President of the United States, is absolutely critical, because our structure of government in the United States doesn't allow any one branch, any one leader to accomplish things on a relatively permanent basis, on a legislative basis, or in the courts, without having that other support in other branches of government. And so we need to be paying attention not just to the presidential race, we need to be paying attention to who controls the US Senate, who controls state legislatures across the country, who controls local governing bodies, because most of the governing is happening at the state and local level, and we need that to be very clear.
You mentioned Pennsylvania and kind of its mixed parties across the branches. Pennsylvania, of course, is a swing state. It's been in the news all year long in terms of which way we'll go. You are the first Democrat elected in your...
in the state house from my district.
Okay.
Most of the communities I represent, I am the first Democrat.
So using that lens, like, what did it take?
Mm-hmm.
And there are many localities in this position of kind of, it could go one way or the other right now. And having just been in Western Pennsylvania last weekend, the signs that I saw were not yet the Harris-Walz signs, so that might just be that they're not out yet. Right?
Yeah.
But that is that was the ground game that I saw. So just tell me what it'll take.
To give you a little bit of the lay of the land, in our state house, there are 102 Democrats and 101 Republicans. And so it's very close. And that's where the state is, to be quite honest. And my area, if I go 5 miles north of my area, we're in Trump country. If I go 5 miles south of my area, we're in Bernie Sanders country. It is the ultimate swing purple area that is there. What it took for me to win was really two things. One is you have to meet voters where they are. When I ran, a lot of people looked at me and said, "That's nice you're running, but we don't think a Democrat can win." Now, they hadn't looked at the numbers. They hadn't seen that there was a lot of change in the community. But what really got people interested in the race is that I door knocked in my district constantly. By the end of my campaign, I had knocked on close to 13,000 doors in my district as someone who was relatively unknown to then being a well-known figure within my community, showing there's a saying in medicine that nobody cares about what you know until they know you care. That's true in electoral politics too. And that's what it took to win on a grassroots level. But on a policy level, it was the chaos of the Trump administration and the Trump era. People had not signed up for trying to rip away healthcare from millions of Americans, trying to overturn reproductive rights, saying that we can't do anything for gun violence, saying that we're not going to protect voting rights, that we're not going to invest in our public schools. Those are fundamental bread and butter issues where I made it clear there was a difference between myself and my opponent. And I think that's true in this election as well. With Kamala Harris now being at the head of our ticket, we're not talking about the relative capacity or health of the candidates. We're talking about two very different visions for the country and frankly for the world. What happens in this election is going to affect what the United States does in foreign policy as well. And so I think what we need to do is to take what is frankly a winning vision. On every electoral issue, it is very clear the public is with Democrats and not with Republicans, and that we need to meet people where they are. In my campaign, I'm up for re-election this year. In my campaign, I've already knocked on more than 9,000 doors this campaign. So by the end of it, I'll probably have knocked on more than 13,000 doors at the end of this campaign. And that's what it's going to take across the state in order to win this election.
We're going to start winding down here. You would have thought I'd start with this question, but I actually think it's fitting to conclude on it. Why did each of you get into politics? Shekar, we can start with you.
Well, I think very good question, and it's helpful to reflect on that. Once in a while when running around so much, have to take a minute to really pause and remember that too, and hold that close. I was a civil rights lawyer for 13 years before, and I always said when I ran that I'm running because I know how important it is for everyone to have a home, because where you live affects everything else around you. The access to healthcare you have, the support that you need for your small business, to pay your rent, to afford childcare. And so as a lawyer, before representing tenants against housing discrimination, just know how important it is to make sure you have a home. And home is different, means different things. It's a home, it's where you live. It could be a home that's 10,000 miles away, and making sure the community you live in now helps you remember that home that's 10,000 miles away too. And I think that's also a crucial issue, as Arvin mentioned, in the election right one too, right? Is when you think about where we all live, putting aside party differences and everything, every American, just like every New Yorker, cares about making sure they can afford where they live, making sure their child care or their care for their ailing parent is affordable, making sure that they have what they need to make it by where they live. That's really front and center in everyone's minds right now. And there's only one party that is truly focused on that, and that's Democratic Party, and that the vision they put forward by Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And that's why it's so crucial that we, as Arvin said, come out and make sure, whether you live in Pennsylvania, a swing state, Wisconsin, Michigan, or even in New York, that may be a solidly blue state, we've got to get out there and make sure that vision of uniting us and focusing on the things that matter most in your home community, that those issues are addressed. And there's only one party and one candidate that's doing that. That's Kamala Harris.
I completely agree with everything that Shekar said. I get asked this question a lot. The first people who asked me were actually my parents. It was like, you're a successful physician, why are you doing this? And they said it in a very colorful way of number. So, for me, I was active with physician organizations, and I was president of the State Emergency Physicians Organization when COVID hit. And so I was very involved in the local response to COVID in my community. And what I saw were the divisions that just arose from a misunderstanding of what health and science and what we could or could not do in circumstances. I felt very strongly we needed more people with healthcare and scientific backgrounds in the political arena, helping to make decisions for the betterment of my community, my state, and, the country as a whole. And so that's why I decided to run for office. I joked when I ran that I wanted to focus on first responders and preparedness and, investing in our local community, that I did not want my election to be about abortion and guns. And of course, that's exactly what my election became about, because that's what the voters demanded of me and others. And so for me now, it is that I see so much that health is so much more than what I do as a practicing physician. It's whether you have affordable housing, whether you have a clean environment, whether you have safety and are addressing gun violence, whether you're protecting personal liberty. And so being able to bring that healthcare lens to those debates on behalf of my community is what continues to motivate me.
Yeah. Because our company was founded after the pandemic, I have to say the areas that both of you touched upon, health and housing, have been consistently the areas that Black and Brown communities turn to as, vital in terms of comfort.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
all connected.
Yes,
totally
very much is connected.
I want to conclude with a question that I always ask, our network, kind of in a revolutionary manner for media. URL stands for Uplift, Respect, and Love. We actually include politicians in that. Yeah. So what do you need? What do you need from people who might be watching this? And then is there anything else you want people to know?
So, the biggest thing is, first of all, every eligible voter needs to get out and vote. I know that there are communities that feel alienated from the political process, and I understand that. But decisions are made by those who show up, and this is going to be an incredibly close election. And for those who are overseas, it may be, understanding what the American election is going to be about. For those who are here in the United States, it is absolutely get registered to vote if you're eligible. Make sure you are voting in this election. I think for me personally, being in a kind of a ground zero area within a ground zero state, I'd love to have people come out to my community to knock doors, to meet with voters. Culturally competent communication matters. I don't have the ethnic diversity that Shekar does in his district, but there are diverse populations that I work to connect with all the time. And so I think that's important. And then the worst part of politics, unfortunately, is fundraising. It's something that every elected official has to do. But you need resources in order to be able to communicate with the voters about what are the values that you care about and what you're trying to accomplish. And so anybody can go to venkatforpa.com who's here in the United States and is a citizen or a permanent resident and contribute to my campaign. Certainly encourage you to contribute to the Harris-Walz campaign and any election in Pennsylvania, because it is going to be ground zero in this election.
Yeah. Shekar?
Well, I'd say both on the national and local. Nationally, there's no question the stakes couldn't be higher in this election. Think about any issue that you care about. There are two visions being offered, two very different visions for this country. One that we're moving forward, one we're a little bit backward. Whether it's, as we talked about, housing and the up to 4-year housing, healthcare, childcare, these issues are all on the ballot. And so you have to think about who's going to take us forward on these issues. As Bill Clinton said in his speech last night, and who's not even take us backwards, but who's not even focused on this issue. There's only one answer on it. And so get out and vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. We talk about these issues and we're here today, but it's really, at the end of the day, all that matters is that you're out knocking doors, talking to neighbors, and ultimately getting you, your friends, and your family to vote. We have such a short window of time left, and this election will decide so much about the future of this country. And get involved locally, as Arvin was saying too. It's not just the national level that matters, but when you step outside your door, everything that touches you or you interact with on your way to work or to school is affected by local politics. And so it's important to keep that energy going, to vote for the right candidate to represent you in office, in your community, in your city, in your state. Keep that political momentum activism going, because that's the only way that we are going to be able to ensure that we have representation for our communities of color, especially, that have lacked it for so long. And I think that's so critical to keep in mind. The national and local level matters so much. And follow, our work. I'm on social media at Vote Shekar. Sign up on our newsletter on the City Council website as well to get our updates too. But really look out to find and support the candidates that speak your vision and your values, whether it's in your hometown or across the country.
And I will take each of your leads and hope that people who are watching or listening follow URL Media. That's url-media.com. So thank you both for the lessons on promoting your work.